Let's bring in our panel to talk about it. From Newsmax Washington, Republican strategist Ford O'Connell, chairman of the Civic Forum PAC, and Skyping in from Madison, Wisconsin, but minus those distinctive glasses we've seen for so long, Josh Orton, the senior advisor of Progressives United. So Josh, mindful of the absence of your hip glasses, maybe we don't need new glasses to see this, but a new set of eyes. Robert Menendez is not happy. A lot of Americans of Cuban descent are not happy. The notion of diplomatic relations with Cuba, do you believe this is a good move?
I do, and I understand. I think we can all agree that many Cuban Americans have very traumatic memories and have went through incredible. Them and their families went through incredibly traumatic experiences with the Cuban government, and those are experiences that no one will ever forget, and nor should they. But I think that the time has come for this step, and I think the Obama administration is doing the right thing. I think that we're just seeing the first images of the return home, the flight. Coming home with Senator Pat Leahy aboard, and I really think that the time for this is right. I don't want to get ahead of the president's speech in a few minutes, but look, I think that this has been a deliberate, carefully negotiated item, and I think that the burden of building a democratic government is going to be on the Cuban people, but I think that this paves the way for them to develop that.
All right, about 2:30.
Josh, I could not disagree more. Times have changed, but the Castros are still in charge of Cuba. How are we going to promote democracy? All you're doing is boosting up a totalitarian regime that is well known as a terrorist state, and you're not going to stop the human rights violations. This is a nice way to put it, and I hope you're right. But right now, until the Castros are gone, I'm sorry, this is a very bad move, not only for Cuba, America, and not only that, Josh, it's not just Cuban Americans that have bad memories. You also have Americans. Remember, the Castros are the ones who parked nuclear missiles 90 miles from Florida in 1959,
oh, sure. Look,
and they're still in power, my friend.
My parents lived on the East Coast and remember the duck and cover drills where they thought that their school desks would protect them. Look, I understand that the Castros have a long, tenuous history with the United States, but my question is, at what point? At what point, Ford, do you think that we can give the Cuban people a chance?
As soon as they're gone, when you recognize them, Josh, you are going to prop them up. And let me tell you something. We're going to put embassies there.
Okay,
we're going to let
remittances
go. And Josh, I'm telling you, you're helping the Castros.
Okay, bottom line is you think that this helps the Castros. They are still in power there. I am very curious. Ana Navarro was on CNN earlier today. She talked about the unilateral nature of this announcement, the fact that Congress is out of session, everybody's gone home, and now the president is making this announcement. What has to follow? Can the president unilaterally offer this diplomatic recognition through the State Department? Josh Orton?
Well, no, I think that what the White House is going to say is that they can do only so much with their executive power, and that to actually take the next steps here will require congressional approval. And I think that that's something that's going to come up in the next session.
What's your take on it,
See,
Ford?
here we go again. So much that they can do with their executive power. This is once again, he could be encroaching depending on what he does on the Constitution, JD.
Yeah,
the Cuban embargo is still in place since 1959, my friend, when Congress ratified it.
That's, look, I'm eager for Congress to get off its butts and do something. But as we've seen in the last
So you should supersede power via inaction because you think for some reason today, of all days, Cuba's a better country because, well, now the president's dictated it is so. This guy has done a terrible job dealing with totalitarian.
Hang on, guys. It's a spirited discussion. It's a passionate discussion. I appreciate it. We're going to bring you both back, hopefully not to talk simultaneously, but with each other. Stay with. In light of our major developing story today, that the United States appears poised to renew diplomatic relations with Cuba, let's continue our conversation. Screen right from Washington, D.C., our Newsmax operation there, we've got Republican strategist Ford O'Connell, and in the center of the screen, though he leans way left, it's Josh Orton of Progressives United, Skyping in from Madison, Wisconsin. Gentlemen, it's been a spirited discussion. May have to be a little bit more of easy for me to say today, a traffic cop. Get out the gavel and monitor this. But while I try to regain whatever speech abilities I have, this whole announcement, I would think, leaves South Florida, Miami, Hialeah, those environs, if not speechless, then shocked. Florida politics, Ford O'Connell, what does the announcement of renewed diplomatic relations with Cuba mean?
Well, you don't have to go any further than Representative-elect Carlos Curbelo, who really thinks the whole situation is bad because they believe that you're not going to wind up promoting democracy and you're not going to tone down the human rights violations. What you're going to wind up doing is giving the Castro regime more power, more money, more legitimacy, and the ability to pass on that mantle to a hand-picked successor. And that is really the biggest concern. And frankly, the idea of a prisoner swap for 3 Cuban spies are not very happy. People are happy that Alan Gross is coming home, but beyond that, this really has to be investigated what went on, because there's also the idea that there may be a U.S. intel officer who Cuba's held in prison for the past 20 years who might actually be part of this swap.
Well, we'll keep our eyes on that, but I'm curious, Josh Orton. I opened our segment before the last break quoting Democratic New Jersey Senator Menendez, who obviously is a Cuban American. He's got his problems with seeing this. There is bipartisan opposition, but you make the point that the times are changing.
Sure. Yeah. And look, I don't think American policy can be frozen in time. I mean, I like fins on my Cadillacs and poodles on my skirt as much as the next guy. But in the end, these sanctions have been in place for, way longer than my lifetime, for decades now, to little result. And in the end, I guess I would ask Ford and other conservatives who seem to think that the status quo is working, what are we waiting for? At what point are we waiting? Are we waiting are we going to make the Cuban people wait for a democratic governor and for free markets until every last Castro has passed away?
Let's let Ford answer that question. Go ahead, Ford.
I think that as we've
you talk about that this has been in place for
Ford's turn now.
but nothing
Josh,
has changed on their end.
Hang on, guys.
Josh, nothing has changed
on
their end. The Castros are still in charge, and that is the problem. Obviously, if Cuba was making baby steps towards democracy, free markets, etc., that would be great, but that is not the case. This is a legacy item for President Obama. In his defense, he's actually been talking about this. He basically wants to increase U.S. relationships with 10 top dictators.
Let him ask the question, Ford, and you can answer. Hang on, everybody. Okay, the chair recognizes Josh. Go ahead.
Ford, do you think that Cuba poses an imminent threat to the United States?
Yes, I do.
What threat is that? Can you describe it?
Terrorism, let's start with number one. They're a terrorist country. They're in cahoots with half of Central America, including Venezuela. So are you really going to tell me that they don't prove disastrous to the U.S. economic and strategic interests?
If we're going to have this discussion, we need to get specific. What specifically is the terroristic threat from Cuba?
Let's see. Over time, they've gotten into bed with the Russians. They've gotten into bed with Venezuela. They've gotten into bed with everybody who's against the U.S. interest and wants to see us
fall. Josh, he's
you keep
answered the question. It may not be the answer you want. You may not be the answer.
Look, I'm not sure he has answered the question. Well, I think that in the end, like one of the things that we have to look at as a country is every country a relationship and what the past wrongs of the country have been versus whether or not our influence, our access to markets, our trade, our cultural influence will help the people of that country become a more free and democratic society.
I have to end it right there. We'll renew this conversation. To you both, gentlemen, our thanks, and America's Forum will continue.